Hi everyone, welcome back to the Academy of God. And today I wanted to share concerning faith and how you can take a promise that God has given you and bring it into manifestation. But I want to talk concerning it, but more in the aspect of how faith interact with God's promises. Now, what happens is that usually when people have received a promise from God, it can be about anything. And let's say the Lord tells you, well, you'll meet your husband or something like that. That's very It's happening a lot in the church now. So let's say the God tells you you're going to meet your husband or your wife. Usually what people do is that they take that and they start to pray about it. They say, "Oh Lord, you've given me this promise and it's going to happen," which is good. And then comes the waiting period. One month comes in, 2 months, 5 months, some people 1 year. Now you start to doubt and you're praying, you're fasting concerning it. And then you start to get sad, sometimes depressed. It's not coming. What is happening? Am I even on the right path? And all kinds of things. Now, here is the mystery I want to share with you is that when God gives you a promise, it's already yours. When God gives you a promise, it's not something that you have to pray about to make it happen. I want to take the example of Abraham. God said to Abraham, "You're going to have a son." Now, Abraham had to wait, and that waiting time period, I'm going to touch on it also. But Abraham had to wait, and he didn't have to pray to bring the promise of God into manifestation. In fact, at some point, he and Sarah tried to help God. And Sarah said, "Well, Abraham, why don't you take my servant and have a child with her?" And he did. And God came later to tell him that this wasn't his plan. So God didn't need the help of Abraham to bring into manifestation the promise that he had given him. God didn't need you, he didn't need me or anybody's help to manifest his promise. When he tells you that this is yours, it is yours. Now, what happens in the waiting time, in the waiting period, a lot of people are mistaken because they are thinking that God is testing you. He's testing your faith. God doesn't need to test you. He knows where you stand. What happened is that the waiting period is actually a war happening in the spirit realm, trying to delay. And what the enemy does is that the enemy cannot stop the promise of God from manifesting. He cannot stop. The only thing that the enemy can do is to make you give up. Why and how? And that has to do with faith. Your faith is what brings the manifestation of God's promises. It's the interaction between your faith and God's promises that brings it into being. It has nothing to do with your prayers. And the enemy cannot stop it. The only thing that he can do is to wear you out to the point that you stop having faith. And faith is not just believing. It's actually a spiritual substance. It's like something that's being emitted from your spirit. Usually when I see it, when I saw it from from my perspective, on me, it comes in the form of blue bubbles. For some people it's like light coming out of them. So faith is, it is something that is emitted by your spirit, and that power is what, when it when it enter in collusion with the promise of God, it brings it into manifestation. Now the problem is that the enemy, he tries to bring delay by waging war in the spirit, and he tries to delay it as best as he can, so that you get tired to wait, you stop producing faith, and you start to give up. And when you give up on faith, this is when the promise dies. That's when the promise dies. And this is how the enemy actually manages to kill people's destiny, people's God's promises over people's life, by making them to stop producing faith. And how do you produce that faith? Well, usually faith, even though it comes from the spirit, you have to maintain it, because when you're in a very low and sad state of being, you feel depressed, saddened, all these emotions, it brings you down. It clouds you. It's like a dark cloud around you. And it kills the hope and the faith inside of you. It clamps it like a dark cloud. What happens then is that you need to remove this cloud. And this is why the scriptures usually talks about singing psalms to yourself, giving thanksgiving to the Lord, and all those things. Why? It's actually maintaining your soul. And when you maintain your soul by these practices, it helps you remove all those dark clouds. It helps your spirit rise up. And from that position, your spirit can easily release that faith, because then you stand in the promise that I know God has promised to give me this and that, and I know that it is coming. Now, when you're declaring that, you're making faith declaration. And that's literally all you have to do. Remain in that state of joy, in that state of hope, knowing that it is going to happen, because God has already spoken it. He has already given you the promise. It is already yours. The rest has nothing to do with you, because the war that the enemy is doing is just to try and bring delay, to make you stop believing, to make you stop producing that faith. But if you can overcome it, if you can stand in joy, knowing that it is coming, he has lost. And that's usually when people notice that the moment when they least expect the promise of God to happen, it's when they see the manifestation. And let's take the case of, for many of you, maybe the Lord told you, oh, you're gonna get a wife or a husband, and you know it's going to happen. You have the expectation, and because you know it is already yours, you no longer need to worry yourself about it. So you just go your day, and you just continue doing what the Lord wants you to do. So you continue having your focus on him. And then all of a sudden one day, maybe you're walking down the mall, or maybe you go to a birthday party, or I don't know, what kind of event. And there you meet a person, and suddenly the Lord speaks to you. He says, "Oh, this is the person that I had prepared for you." When you least expected it, it happened, because while you were in faith, knowing that God's promise is already yours and it is happening and it is going to happen, God was preparing and setting up everything in place for it to happen. Just like Abraham and his story. Time went on as the enemy was trying to bring delay, but Abraham kept having faith. And then one day he met three angels, and that day is when he got the fulfillment that next year you'll have your child. And the next year, the year after that moment, Isaac was born. The same can also be seen in the story of Daniel, when he started his 21 days fast, and then an angel came to visit him. But the angel told him that the very first day when he started praying, he was sent with the answer of his prayers. But the delay, meaning the time from the angel being sent and the angel actually arriving to Daniel with the answer, that time was due to a war in the spirit realm trying to delay. But because Daniel continued his fasting and his prayers, he did not give up. He ended up receiving the answer that he was praying for. So the fight of the enemy is not to stop or to cancel what God is doing in your life, or the promise that God wants to manifest in your life. But his plan is to actually make you give up, to make you stop doing what you're already doing, to make you stop having faith. And that's why Paul says to fight the good fight of faith.